content. Anyway, so today I really want to talk about one of my most favorite MTSS topics, and that is the characteristics of a good intervention, and then being able to use those characteristics to weed out strategies that we might be using as interventions that actually are not interventions. And so as educational professionals, you all are busy. Like, you have a lot to do, and there are definitely way more students than there are, educators, and it feels like more and more and more, especially as we're trying to crawl our way out of the weeds of the pandemic. The needs of students are just so much higher. And so the idea that we're going to be needing to do a lot more intervention is pretty real. And so I think it's important that we go into this next year or two, I struggle to say post-COVID, because I think that perhaps maybe, well, I don't know that we're post-COVID, maybe we're post-pandemic. I don't know, because COVID I don't think is I mean, I'm not going to get into COVID, but my point being is that what we thought were really great needs before was true, and now what is going to continue to be really great needs is even more true, and it's even more students based on however they're coming to us. And so I think it's really important that we all understand, to the absolute best of our ability, what kinds of strategies we could be using that are more apt to get the results we want as educators, and to kind of weed out the ones that maybe aren't as effective, so we can spend our time doing the things that are effective. You are watching the MTSS by Design channel, and here on this channel, we are going to talk about all things MTSS, from leadership protocols down to individual interventions that you can use in your classroom. My hope is that after each episode, you're going to have something you can walk away with. Think of this as like a micro PD, right? When it comes to PD, shorter bursts and like lots of reminders are an opportunity to practice is probably way better than 6 or 7 or 8 hours, sitting in a room somewhere. But then here I am thinking about, what about a micro PD? What about a 10-minute segment on something super small that can be implemented immediately? And so that's why we're here. That's why I'm starting this channel, is because I think that there are tiny things that we can do, that we can adopt on any given day, that can make a huge difference in the lives of our kids. I am on a mission to make sure that every student has an opportunity to access the very best multi-tiered systems of supports that can possibly exist. And that's where you come in, because you all are the ones in front of our students. You all are the ones that are going to be making this happen. And so I get to sit here and make big claims, and in the end, you're the one that's going to go out and you're going to be the one that's enacting on them and implementing them. So I want to empower you. I love helping schools problem solve their MTSS, their RTI, their interventions, their why isn't this working for everyone? And so together, I think that we can get through a lot of really great things. Okay, so I want to get to the 3 characteristics of a good intervention and the framework that I use to teach schools to help them understand how to apply those 3 characteristics in a really fast way, so that they can spend less time with the guess and check of intervention choosing and really get down to figuring out like the thises and the nots, or the that's and the nots. But first I thought we better talk about a few of the reasons why interventions tend to fail to begin with. And I think that you'll be surprised that rarely do these things come down to the student. These things mostly come down to the systems and the structures that we as adults have put in place. So one of the first ones I wanted to talk about was that the intervention itself is too broad in scope. And we've probably seen that a lot. You've probably seen that a lot, where you have a student or a group of students and they need an intervention, and they need some sort of academic or behavioral support, and you go and you search and you search and you search and you search and you find the best intervention that's out there, or the greatest the greatest program that's out there that exists. And then you get it into your school, and it's difficult to learn. It's difficult to break down. it's time consuming to break down, and ultimately the pieces themselves can't be broken down into units that are small enough to truly act as an intervention, right? So you should think of intervention programs like Lego, right? In Legos, there are a variety of sizes of the same brick, right? So all the red bricks, there's going to be short, skinny ones, and tall ones, and wide and tall ones, and wide and flat ones. And you use the Lego to pick and choose how you're going to put the structure together, or how you're going to create something with it. And so when we're thinking of interventions in schools, we really need to be thinking about intervention from that perspective as well, right? Can it be broken down into bits and pieces that I can mix and match to make the best intervention for this particular group or for this particular student? And I know a lot of publishers out there will urge you not to break down their programs, and I absolutely understand that. If I were a publisher and I were the one that was putting out a program that I knew was going to work for students, I would want you to do it with fidelity as well. Of course I would. But not all academic program publishers are educators. And so they may not always know, like, where would have been a better place to break that down, or what would have been a better support to put in here. And so really using your intuition and your knowledge as the educator to be able to look at a particular program and say, okay, is this something that I can break down to be more accessible or more easy for my educators to implement? The second thing that I wanted to talk about what another reason why interventions fail, is that the people and the time and the space in your building are not well organized. And so what I mean by that is, take a look at your master schedule. Is your master schedule set up like a soccer field where everybody is working on the same goal at the same time towards the end of the game? And so, the strategies and the decisions are always evolving based on what happens on the field. Or is it set up more like a gymnastics meet, where each individual gymnast is competing against themselves, and in terms of the team approach, their scores get added in towards the final score at the end, right? And so if that gymnast makes a mistake and gets a low score, then that can have a huge detrimental effect to the overall score of the team, right? And that can mean the difference between the gold, the silver, and the bronze. So when you're thinking about your master schedule, look at your individual teacher schedules. Are they running like independent units parallel to each other, or are they functioning as a continuous whole where everybody is working towards the same goal? And that brings me to the idea of the same goal. I don't mean that every student has the same goal or that every teacher has the same goal. What I mean is, if your school doesn't have a school-wide goal that everybody is working towards, then that's a tier 1 aspect that you can build into your MTSS that can have a huge impact even on your tier 3, right? And so your strong tier 1, your goals in tier 1, those, you can't have a good tier 3 unless you have a really solid tier 1. And so keeping that in mind. So now to the third one. The third one is your teaming structure. And your teaming structure actually connects with your time, people, and space construct that we just talked about a few moments ago. And what I mean by that is, does your team, and I don't necessarily mean who is on your team or like what you discuss at your team or how often you meet as a team. What I'm talking about is kind of the game plan of the team. And so I'm going to relate this back to the gymnastics and the soccer field analogy, right? So do the team members all come to the table with their expertise, which yes, we want that, but are they able to provide the expertise in the team meeting that moves the group forward rather than just moving individual students forward? Is the information that's being presented and the topics that are being discussed at the meeting, are they conducive to a game plan where you're working towards that school-wide goal, right? Or is it more like a gymnastics meet where everybody brings their expertise, they're all doing their expertise, They're there to provide only their expertise, and then their scores get added up at the end to decide whether the team is going to get the gold or the silver or the bronze. Or does your team function, is it structured like a soccer game, right? In a soccer game, it's similar to gymnastics in that everybody still has their expertise. Everybody still has their role that they're working on. But rather than working on those roles individually and then adding up the score at the end, those roles, they combine to create a system. And that system's goal is everybody has to do their job at the same time, simultaneously, while they all adapt to the things that arise in front of them. They have to plan. They have to know exactly what the other position might be doing at any given point in time. And then they're all working towards that same goal. So a soccer game is 90 minutes of constant action. A gymnastics meet is 2 hours of intermittent action. If you ask me, I think our schools function way more like soccer fields than gymnastics meets. And so our teams have to function that way too. Fourth thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into the characteristics of an intervention is that the strategies that we're using are actually not interventions. Okay, an intervention has 3 specific criteria. Okay, so you're going to want to write these down. Number 1, it must be narrow in focus. Number 2, it must increase in time. And number 3, it must be teacher directed. I call this at the Center for Optimized MTSS the FT squared framework, where I create an opportunity for schools to bring their interventions to the table and then run them through the framework. Does this strategy narrow in focus for the student? Does this strategy increase in time for the student? And is this strategy implemented and instructed by an educator, one-on-one in a human-to-human capacity? So let's talk a little bit about some of the interventions that I often see, or rather some of the strategies that I often see, and let's run them through this framework just really quick to practice. Sometimes when we get down to the meetings, I'll hear administrators ask teachers, okay, well, the student is struggling, I'm having a hard time getting them caught up, I'm having a hard time meeting their needs, and the administrator says, okay, well, tell me what interventions you've tried. And one of the interventions among the many will be that they tried preferential seating. Well, let's look at preferential seating and run it through the FT squared framework, okay? Does preferential seating narrow in skill? Does preferential seating increase in time? Is preferential seating teacher directed? Now, we could argue that preferential seating is teacher directed, especially if the teacher was the one that put the student in that seat. But once that child gets there, it's still up to them to figure out what they do with that or how they respond to that. So why do we move students to the beginning of to the front of the room next to the teacher? Well, it can certainly reduce the amount of avoidance that a student is engaging in, or it can increase the number of check-ins that a teacher is able to give a student, and a student is able to access their teacher. But in terms of an intervention, it's not, because it doesn't meet the 3 criteria: narrow in skill, increase in time, and is teacher directed. Let's take a look at another strategy that I often see, and these are marketed sometimes as intervention strategies, and that's things like computerized programs. So your Lexias and your IXLs and your fast math and all of those kinds of things. Really great programs, and you can get a lot of really great data from these programs, but they're great strategies for practice, and they're great strategies for honing in skills that are being generalized. But when we're talking about intervention, we're not talking about generalizing skills, okay? So let's run just your average computerized program through the FT squared. Does it narrow in focus? Yep, it could. Does it increase in time? That depends. Is it being done during the math block or during the ELA block? Or is it being done in addition to the math block or the ELA block? And is it teacher directed? Well, again, that's another tricky one, because is a teacher spending 10 or 15 minutes with the student, or even 5 or 10 minutes with the student, to go through the program with them and interact with them during the programming before they expect the child to go off on their own? Or is the child directed to go and sit and practice their IXL, or go and sit and do, their 15 minutes of Lexia? In which case it's computer directed and not teacher directed. And so there's a very fine line there. When is a computer program appropriate as an intervention? Well, a computer program is appropriate as an intervention when it meets its own criteria. So not only does it have to meet the 3 criteria of an intervention, which is narrow in focus, increase in time, and teacher instructed, but it has even other criteria that has to meet the stages of an intervention. And we're not going to talk about that today, but if you're interested in that topic, why don't you leave a comment and just let me know, do you want a video that talks about the stages of an implementation, or of implementation of an intervention, and how that relates to you, the people that are choosing the interventions and implementing the interventions? So if you've gotten value from this video, I would really encourage you to like and subscribe to the video, because over the course of time, over the course of the next, say, 4 months, each week, I'm going to be putting out a quick 20-minute video that is going to cover some topic related to MTSS. And in a perfect world, I would want those topics to be directed by you. So if you have a question, if you have something you've been wondering about, if you have a desire to push back on something that I've presented to you, leave it in the comments. And then you're going to want to know when that video releases so that you can come back and watch it. I also have a Facebook group if you're interested, and to get there you would just simply need to go to facebook.com/MTSS by design. It is a private group, so you will have to answer the questions before I will allow you to come in. And in the Facebook group, occasionally you're going to have access to bloopers, you're going to have access to B-rolls and other kinds of things. Like I said this morning, earlier today, that this video was recorded like 2 other times, and there are some pretty funny things that happened in the recordings of both of those videos. And so you're really not going to want to miss those opportunities. And plus, in that Facebook group, there are going to be announcements for text discussions, and other MTSS professionals reach out and ask questions and look for support from their community, and in helping them to navigate the complex world of MTSS. So let's recap one more time, okay? Stop using strategies that are not interventions. You're wasting your time. You can get so much better information about whether a strategy is going to be an effective intervention if it meets 3 criteria. Number 1, it narrows in focus. Number 2, it increases in time. And number 3, it's teacher directed.